Welcome to Wife Cheating Story. I hope you have an enjoyable and relaxing time listening. Let's get started.
I never imagined rock bottom would have a garage door opener. But here I was, 34 years old, lying on a creaky cot beside a busted lawnmower and a weight bench that hadn't seen a barbell since Gavin's college football days. The bulb above me flickered like it couldn't decide whether to give up or keep suffering with me. It buzzed constantly, like it was laughing at the man I'd become. Or maybe I was projecting. Hard to tell anymore. Every night I stared at the oil-stained ceiling, replaying the moment it all fell apart. One email. That was all it took. One chain of messages I hadn't been supposed to see, my name stripped off the patent I'd slaved over, my access revoked, my email disabled, and then the boardroom meeting where they smiled and told me it was just business. Except business doesn't usually come with betrayal this personal. I was ousted, blindsided, and broke by the end of that same month. Gavin said, "Stay here a while, just until you figure things out." He said it like he was doing me a favor, but every comment he made since sounded like a trophy being polished. "Still working on your comeback, bro," he'd say while cracking open a cold beer, tossing his gym bag over my cot like I wasn't in it. "You ever think about flipping cars? You know, something simple, realistic?" I used to have a view of the Charles River from a penthouse suite. Floor-to-ceiling windows. A kitchen so clean it looked like a showroom. I cooked for Piper in that kitchen once. Duck confit and truffle risotto. She called it our Michelin star date night. I remembered how her laughter echoed off the tile backsplash, how her eyes softened when I surprised her with dessert, chocolate souffle, barely risen, but perfect in its attempt. She used to believe in me, maybe more than I deserved. Now my morning view was a stack of cardboard boxes labeled Gavin's Winter and Camping Crap. The only thing gourmet about my life now was the instant coffee I sipped like it had meaning. The taste was bitter, but it was the warmth I needed, reminding me I was still alive, still breathing, still tethered to something, even if it was just resentment and pride. The garage didn't have heat, just a plug-in space heater Gavin loaned me that clicked loudly every few minutes like it resented working overtime. I'd wrap myself in a fleece blanket that smelled vaguely of mothballs and Axe body spray and pretend that dignity didn't feel like a luxury item. Every once in a while, Gavin's fiancée Naomi would poke her head in. She'd smile, say something like, "Hey, you need anything?" Her eyes lingered sometimes. Not in that way, but like she knew I didn't belong here. One night, she brought me a slice of pie. "Apple. Warm. Homemade," she said. I asked if Gavin made it. She laughed and said, "Please, he thinks cinnamon is spicy." She stayed in the doorway, her shadow brushing over the pile of old sports gear behind her. "It's temporary," she offered gently, not quite looking at me. "Just temporary." I nodded, because what else could I say? That I missed the sound of my espresso machine hissing in the morning? That I missed being called sir in meetings? That I hated the way Gavin always left the garage door slightly ajar, so the cold seeped in, like a reminder I was never truly inside? He had a way of saying things that stung even when they were wrapped in smiles. "Man, remember when you were on the cover of Forbes?" He'd grin, sipping his protein shake. That was wild, right? As if I dreamed it. As if the accolades, the articles, the late nights building something real had all been fiction. My fall was their favorite bedtime story. I started counting time in creaks. The way the door to the kitchen creaked at midnight when Gavin went for a snack. The way the cot creaked when I shifted under my guilt. The way my ribs creaked when I sat up too fast from another dream where I still had something to lose. My phone had long since stopped buzzing with opportunity. Now it was spam calls, occasional texts from Monroe, my old college roommate turned journalist, asking if I was ready to tell my side. I wasn't. Not yet. Not until I could say it without sounding like I needed pity. Not until I could stand up without the weight of shame pressing into my spine like a permanent question mark. Sometimes I'd open my laptop and scroll through my old presentations. The ones that got standing ovations in San Diego, in Berlin, in Singapore. I'd click through slides filled with data, with promise, with blueprints of a future I helped design. Then I'd close it before the bitterness made me forget why I ever started. Late at night, the garage would fall silent. Just the slow hum of the heater and the drip, drip, drip of a leak Gavin kept meaning to fix. In those moments, I talked to myself more than I'd admit. I'd say, "You're not done." Or, "They didn't bury you. They just stopped looking." It was pathetic maybe, but it was mine, and it was something. For months deep. That's how long it had been since I landed here. For months of pretending this was temporary. For months of wondering if Piper ever thought of me, if she regretted marrying Marcus, my old coworker, now a vascular surgeon with a jawline that made women sigh in elevators. Gavin mentioned him last week like it was casual gossip. Piper's husband just got published. Something about cardiac stents. Big deal. You ever think of going back to school? I laughed. Not because it was funny, but because it was the only option left that didn't involve screaming. I used to build machines that could power homes with half the energy of standard grids. Now I fixed Gavin's lawnmower just so I could feel useful. There was a mirror in the corner, old and cracked, probably from one of Gavin's gym days when testosterone outweighed logic. I looked at it sometimes, trying to find the man I used to be. But all I saw was the shell. Unshaven. Eyes dim. Shoulders hunched. Still breathing. And maybe, just maybe, still fighting. Even if the battleground was a garage that smelled like gasoline and broken promises. Gavin burst through the side door of the garage like he owned the world. He didn't knock. He never knocked. Just barged in, smelling of expensive cologne and validation. The scent of someone whose life was going exactly how he planned. He had on that smug grin he always wore when he was about to say something he thought was clever. I didn't look up right away. I was mid-email, typing on my laptop with cold fingers, trying to pitch an old contact for a consulting gig. But Gavin's voice filled the space whether I acknowledged him or not. "You'll be there tomorrow, right?" he asked, like it was a given. I blinked. "There where?" He didn't even flinch. "The wedding, man. My wedding." "Right. That. The wedding I'd been hearing about nonstop for months but never formally invited to. Not that I needed an invitation when I was already living rent-free in the groom's garage. Still, the way he said it made it clear this wasn't about brotherly love. This was spectacle. A performance. And I was the opening act for his triumph. I mean, front row seat. Gavin continued, like he was doing me a favor. Wouldn't feel right getting married without my big brother there to see it. Family right. I closed my laptop a little too hard. Of course. Wouldn't miss it. He grinned wider. Good. Great. Just don't wear that thing. He gestured toward the hoodie I was wearing. One of my last clean pieces of clothing that didn't smell like damp cardboard or garage funk. I didn't bother responding. Let him have his moment. He thought he was winning some unspoken battle between us. In his mind, he had the girl, the house, the job, the future. I had a cot, a flickering bulb, and a brother who couldn't stop measuring himself against me now that he'd finally found the upper hand. "Oh, and Piper's coming," he added as he turned toward the garage fridge and pulled out a bottle of water. That made my stomach tighten. Piper. He didn't look at me. Didn't need to. He knew the name would hit like a punch. Yeah, with her husband. Marcus, right? The guy you used to work with. He's a surgeon now. Crazy, huh? Small world. My jaw clenched. Marcus. Of course. The man who smiled at my jokes during board meetings and then stole both my position and my fiancée like he'd earned them. Piper had always been ambitious, but I never imagined she'd trade loyalty for status. I guess I hadn't given her enough to stay for. "That's great," I said, lying through my teeth. "Looking forward to it." Gavin turned back and leaned against the workbench like he owned even that. "You good, man? You seem a little off." I forced a smile. "Just busy. Got a few things I'm working on." He laughed. "Still chasing that comeback, huh? That word again. Comeback. Like I was some washed-up athlete trying to reclaim past glory. Like my work, my intellect, my innovation could be reduced to a sports metaphor." I wanted to lash out. Remind him that the tech he used daily was built on a prototype I designed in a basement on nothing but coffee and ambition. But I stayed silent. Words meant nothing to a man who only measured success in visible trophies. "You'll kill it," he said dismissively, already walking toward the door. "Just don't do anything too, dramatic. It's Naomi's big day, not some redemption arc." He left without waiting for a response. The door slammed shut behind him, rattling the shelves. I stood there, staring at the empty space he'd left behind. I let out a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. Piper was going to be there. With Marcus. That part one couldn't shake. It had been nearly 2 years since I'd seen her last. The day she left, she packed quietly. No shouting. No breakdown. Just a calm statement. "I can't do this anymore." I asked her what this was, being with me? Watching me build something from scratch. watching it fall apart. She never answered, just said she hoped I'd find peace. Marcus came up a few months later, smiling in a LinkedIn post next to her in matching lab coats at a charity gala. It had crushed something in me I hadn't known was still breakable. And now I'd see them both. At a wedding. In a ballroom. Dressed in their finest, looking like the kind of couple Pinterest pages were made for. I'd have to stand there and smile while they whispered, "Isn't that Royce? The one who used to be something." As if being something had an expiration date. But I wasn't going to that wedding to validate Gavin. And I sure as hell wasn't going to see Piper. I was going for me. Because somewhere inside me, beneath the layers of loss and dust and doubt, I remembered who I used to be. I remembered standing on that TEDx stage, demoing a prototype that could revolutionize urban energy storage. I remembered the emails from MIT grads who wanted to intern under me. The investors who flew from London just to tour my lab. That version of me wasn't dead. He was buried. And maybe the wedding would be the shovel. That night, I pulled out the old garment bag I'd shoved behind the boxes. Inside was the tuxedo I hadn't worn since the last investor gala I was invited to. It was still sharp. Midnight blue with black satin lapels. It smelled faintly of cedar and old memories. I laid it out carefully, smoothing the fabric, feeling its weight. I didn't have cufflinks anymore, but I had presence. And that would be enough. I imagined Gavin standing at the altar, smirking. I imagined Piper's glance sliding over the crowd until it landed on me. I imagined her face shifting, just a flicker. Recognition. Regret. Maybe even a question. But most of all, I imagined myself standing tall. Not as the brother who slept in a garage. Not as the man who lost everything. But as the man who remembered. Tomorrow, I'd walk into that ballroom not with shame, but with purpose. Not to cause a scene, but to witness the world that thought I'd disappeared. Because sometimes, the best revenge isn't revenge at all. It's resurrection. 3 weeks before Gavin's wedding, I found myself nursing a lukewarm espresso at a quiet coffee shop in Back Bay. It wasn't one of those sleek places with minimalist decor and single-origin beans flown in from remote mountains. No, this was the kind of place where old wooden chairs creaked and the baristas wrote quotes from forgotten poets on the chalkboard. It was the only spot I could sit without someone recognizing me, or worse, pretending they didn't. I was scrolling through a half-finished draft of a grant proposal I wasn't sure I'd ever send when someone slid into the seat across from me. I didn't look up right away. I figured it was a stranger looking for a plug or someone lost in the eternal search for Wi-Fi. But then I heard her voice. "Don't panic. He doesn't know I'm here." I looked up, and there she was. Naomi, Gavin's fiancée. She wore a long beige coat, hair tucked behind one ear, no makeup, but still striking in that effortless kind of way that made people take her seriously before she even opened her mouth. She glanced around the cafe like someone who didn't want to be followed. It wasn't paranoia, it was precision. I blinked. "Naomi, what are you doing here?" She leaned forward, resting her elbows on the table. "I've been reading up on you," she said, as if that explained everything. I didn't know how to respond. "Okay." She didn't flinch. "I read about your company. About the early prototypes. The patents you filed in 2015. The energy conversion model you presented at Columbia. And the one that disappeared 6 months later." My hands went cold. That wasn't casual curiosity. That was research. Thorough, meticulous research. "Why?" I asked, wary. She looked at me, steady and unblinking. "Because I wanted to understand who you were before you became the guy sleeping in Gavin's garage." I felt something hot rise in my chest, shame or pride. I couldn't tell. I tried to keep my expression neutral. "So you've been digging through my failures?" Naomi shook her head. "Through the lies." Her voice was quiet, but the words rang loud. I leaned back slightly, watching her, unsure of where this was going. Naomi continued. "Gavin repeated what your father told him. That you mismanaged the company, got greedy, burned bridges. But that's not what I found. Your name was on every major filing until the last quarter before the collapse. Your presentation files were all accessed from Parker Bain's IP address 2 weeks before the board vote. The same Parker who now co-owns your old tech under a different LLC. She paused, letting that sink in. I know what a setup looks like. I felt the breath catch in my throat. I hadn't said those words to anyone. Not even Monroe. I hadn't had the energy to fight, and after Piper left, I didn't think anyone would believe me anyway. Why are you telling me this? I asked, voice low. Naomi stared at me. Because Gavin's smart, but not careful. And I'm not marrying someone based on half-truths. I've spent the last year watching him dismiss you like you were a joke. But when I started reading what you built, what you nearly accomplished, it didn't add up. I swallowed hard. So what do you want? Advice? An apology for your wedding backdrop? She smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. No. I want you to know that not everyone thinks you're the punchline. There was silence between us. The murmur of coffee orders and clinking cups filled the air. My hands were clenched on the table, fingers twitching like they were reaching for something long gone. Naomi leaned closer. Did you know your father co-signed one of Gavin's early business loans using collateral from your company? That was never declared to your board. I found the paperwork. That hit like a brick to the chest. My father had always made it clear I was a disappointment, a risk, a man who let emotions guide decisions instead of metrics. But to find out he'd undermined me financially behind my back and never told me, that was betrayal with a bow on top. You're saying I was set up by my own family, I said. Naomi nodded. Yes. I exhaled, slow and shaky. You planning on telling Gavin you met with me? She shook her head. Not yet. I studied her face, trying to read the real motive underneath. You're marrying him. I am, she said calmly. But I don't take well to deception. And if I find out he was involved in what happened to you, she didn't finish the sentence. She didn't have to. There was steel behind her voice. Not vindictive, not dramatic, just cold clarity. I didn't know whether to warn her or thank her. Instead, I said the only thing that felt true in the moment. That night in the garage, when you brought me pie, I thought maybe you were just being kind. But now I think you were trying to figure me out. Naomi smiled, this time more softly. I was. And she stood, fixing her coat. I think you're not who they say you are. And I think you've been quiet long enough. She paused, then added, I'll see you at the wedding, Mr. Royce. Then she turned and walked out of the coffee shop like a storm that left no rain behind. But you still felt it in your bones. I sat there for a long time after she left, staring into the dregs of my coffee. The bitterness didn't taste as sharp anymore. Maybe it was the adrenaline. Maybe it was hope. Maybe it was the smallest flicker of vindication, something I hadn't felt in a long time. For months, I'd been convincing myself that no one cared about the truth, that maybe my story wasn't worth defending anymore. But Naomi had seen the pieces, and she believed me. That belief, that tiny thread of trust, clung to me like armor in the days leading up to the wedding. Not because I needed saving, but because someone finally saw me again. And that made all the difference. The Magnolia Grand Hotel stood like a monument to money. Polished marble floors that gleamed like they were buffed with dollar bills, gold-trimmed everything, and bellboys who looked like they moonlighted as runway models. I stepped out of the rideshare, my reflection winking back at me from the double glass doors. Even the air here smelled expensive, something floral and faintly citrus, probably misted out of vents with more precision than anything I'd owned in the past year. I adjusted the lapels of my midnight blue tuxedo. Rented, of course, crisp and tailored to make it seem like it belonged to me. It didn't. Not yet. But for tonight, appearances were everything. I walked through the entrance with the poise I used to carry naturally, the kind that came from being invited places, not tolerated at them. Inside, the ballroom glittered. Chandeliers like dripping ice hung above a sea of white and gold tablecloths, silverware so polished it doubled as a mirror, and servers in black vests gliding like synchronized dancers across the floor. People milled about in conversation clusters, champagne flutes in hand, laughter bubbling with that familiar note of performative polish. The place reeked of legacy, of curated image, of everything Gavin wanted to be associated with. I kept my chin high, shoulders square. Every inch of me was rehearsed for this. My shoes clicked across the marble with deliberate steps, not rushed or hesitant. Let them look, I thought. Let them whisper. And they did. That's him, right? I caught one say behind a velvet-covered column. The brother? The one who went bankrupt. Someone else added, didn't he lose his patents? I heard it was some kind of scandal. I didn't flinch. I just nodded politely at the couple who tried to mask their curiosity behind tight smiles. My mother was seated near the altar, perched like royalty at the edge of her assigned row. Her hat was a delicate cream monstrosity, rimmed with tiny pearls that matched her earrings and gloves. When her eyes met mine, she didn't smile. She pursed her lips like she'd bitten into something sour and couldn't spit it out in polite company. That look, disappointment wrapped in ice, had been perfected years ago. It was her signature. I walked past her without slowing. We hadn't spoken since I moved into Gavin's garage. Not once. Her silence had volume. There was one face I didn't see in the crowd, my father's. Not that I expected him to be there. He'd picked Gavin as the golden son the minute I chose engineering over law school. When things unraveled at my company, he hadn't called to check in. He'd called to say, "I warned you." After that, the silence between us was mutual. If he was anywhere tonight, it wasn't here. Even he must have known pretending to support me now would be hypocrisy too thick to digest. "Julian." I turned. Naomi stood behind me in her gown, elegant and somehow understated despite the spectacle around her. Satin and lace draped perfectly over her frame, her makeup flawless yet soft. But it wasn't her appearance that struck me. It was her eyes. They were steady, knowing. "Naomi," I greeted, my voice even. She smiled faintly, leaning in. "Glad you came." I tilted my head. Wasn't going to miss it. Before she could say more, Gavin swooped in. All perfect teeth and cologne. He wrapped an arm around her waist like she was a prize he needed to keep on display. "Bro, you made it. You clean up good. I almost didn't recognize you without your garage uniform." He laughed. "I didn't. Thanks," I said coolly. Wouldn't want to embarrass the family name. Gavin didn't pick up on the sarcasm. He was too busy scanning the room for someone else to impress. Naomi gave me one last look, something unreadable in her expression, then allowed herself to be led away. I took my seat near the front, just as promised. The ceremony started on cue. A string quartet played something elegant. The crowd rose. Naomi entered, radiant, gliding down the aisle as every camera angle captured her from 10 different directions. Gavin looked smug, like a man who'd climbed a mountain and wanted the world to know it. I kept my face neutral. Even as Gavin's friends grinned at each other, even as the photographer snapped a shot of me looking like an accidental extra in someone else's story. They said their vows. Standard fare. Love, honor, cherish. No mention of truth. No mention of what came before or what they kept hidden. But Naomi didn't flinch. She said her lines clearly, looked Gavin in the eye, played the part of the bride to perfection. It was only after the ceremony, during the reception, that the mask began to shift. The ballroom had been reset for dining and dancing. Servers weaved through the maze of chairs with champagne and oysters. The air buzzed with expensive small talk. I stood by the far wall, watching. Piper had arrived late. She wore a backless gown in emerald green, hair twisted into a soft bun, her husband Marcus beside her like a well-trained trophy. He was taller than I remembered. Or maybe my memory had just shrunk him down to fit my resentment. They didn't see me yet. I didn't approach. Then the mic rang. Gavin stood at the head table, glass in one hand, microphone in the other. He tapped it once. "If I could have your attention." The crowd hushed. He smiled, giving Naomi a wink. She didn't return it. "I just want to say how grateful I am to everyone who made it out tonight. Friends, colleagues, family," he said, pausing to let the applause swell. "Especially my brother. You all know Julian, right?" Heads turned. I stood still. "He's been crashing at my place." "Well, my garage, for a few months now. Trying to get back on his feet. You know, it's hard out there. No wife, no job, no house. But hey, that's what brothers are for, right?" Laughter. Awkward, but still too loud. "And hey," Gavin added, "he's got plenty of time to write his memoir, from penthouse to power tools." I'd read that. I didn't move. Didn't blink. My blood was lava, slow and thick in my veins. I looked around the room. Faces tried to hide pity. Piper looked down. Marcus smirked. And then my mother stood. "Enough with the jokes," someone muttered. But she raised her glass, voice sharp. "He's a disgrace to this family." No one laughed that time. The silence was violent. I stared at my champagne flute. The bubbles had stopped rising. And then, quietly, someone moved. Naomi. From the head table. Toward the mic. I've never liked the sound of clinking glass. Not at weddings, not at dinner parties, and definitely not when it came from my brother's champagne flute raised high in a ballroom full of power and money. The light from the chandeliers hit the crystal just right, casting flickers across the room like stage lights warming up before a performance. And Gavin, my younger brother, stood at the center of it all like he was the main act in a Broadway debut. His voice rang out over the soft hush that followed his toast introduction, warm and performative. "I just want to say a few words about love, family, and second chances. A few guests smiled, some nodded. The ones who knew us, or thought they did, leaned in with interest. I sat near the front, where I was told to be. Of course, I knew what this was. I hadn't been seated here because of respect. I'd been seated here to make the contrast obvious, to showcase the divide between the success story and the cautionary tale, the perfect brother and the fallen one. I felt their eyes on me before Gavin even turned in my direction. "Family is everything," he said, placing a hand on Naomi's shoulder. She smiled politely, but her eyes didn't shine the way a bride should on her wedding night. And that's why, even when times get hard, we lift each other up. You know, like letting your big brother stay in your garage for 4 months. No wife, no job, no place of his own. But hey, what's a little charity between brothers? Laughter rippled through the crowd like a slow wave. Not the forced, polite kind. The real kind. The kind that starts in the chest and escapes before people realize they should hold it back. I felt my pulse throb in my neck. My jaw tensed. My spine locked into place as I forced my face to remain still. Blank. Unshaken. But inside, I was being hollowed out. "And he's doing his best," Gavin continued, the grin never fading. "Trying to get back on his feet. Got some big ideas, I'm sure. Probably even writing a book. What did I say it would be called, Naomi? Oh, right. From penthouse to power tools. My journey from CEO to garage hero." The crowd erupted again, this time louder. Some clinked glasses. Some actually applauded. I could see Monroe in the back, shoulders tense, arms folded. He didn't laugh. Naomi didn't laugh either. But my mother did. And then she stood. She didn't need a microphone. Her voice had been trained by years of hosting banquets and shaming with a single sentence. "I'm just glad Gavin turned out the way he did," she said, raising her champagne glass as though this were a campaign dinner and Gavin was accepting office. Because this family needed at least one son to be proud of. Her words weren't dramatic. They were cold, clean, surgical, and they cut deeper than anything Gavin could have said. That was the blow, delivered with poise, in front of senators, CEOs, my ex-fiancée, and 100 glittering strangers who didn't know the whole story but didn't care. They only needed headlines, whispers, and performance. I sat there, still like stone. Every instinct inside me screamed to get up, to leave, to throw the damn glass, to shout every betrayal, every theft, every lie into that ornate ceiling until it collapsed with me. But I didn't. I stared at my glass. One hand on my thigh, pressing into the fabric to keep from shaking. The other clutching the edge of the table like it might stop me from floating away. Then, through the ringing silence that followed my mother's final word, came the quiet sound of movement. Naomi rose. Not with haste, not with fluster, with intent. She stepped forward from the head table, reached out, and gently took the microphone from Gavin's hand. He looked surprised, bemused, even. Like he thought she was going to soften the blow, or maybe make a quick joke to smooth things over. She turned to face the crowd, mic steady in her grasp, her chin held high. "I'd like to speak." The room fell into a hush so absolute, even the servers froze mid-step. Gavin's smile wavered for the first time. Naomi's voice was calm, measured, but it carried like a fire alarm in a library. "We celebrate love today. Commitment. Truth. That's what weddings are supposed to be about. But I've come to realize that pretending everything is perfect just for appearances, especially in front of family, is a dangerous thing." She turned then, not toward Gavin, not toward the cameras, toward me. "I met Julian months ago, in quiet, in truth, and I learned things my fiancé never told me, things I was never meant to know, about what happened to his company, his work, his name." Gasps rippled across the room. Some heads swiveled toward Gavin. His face began to harden. "I saw the patents. I read the documentation. I found evidence of collusion, theft, emails between Gavin and Parker." She paused to let the name land. "About how to dissolve Julian's ownership from within, how to erase his contribution, how to spin the narrative so that it looked like failure instead of sabotage." I couldn't move. I couldn't even breathe. My hands had gone cold. My mind raced, grasping for some way to catch up with the moment. Naomi didn't stop. "I didn't come here today to humiliate anyone. That was already done. In fact, it's been done for years. I came to speak the truth. Because silence isn't noble, it's convenient. And lies, when told often enough, become easy to believe." Gavin reached for her arm then, trying to take back the mic. She shifted out of his grasp with the ease of someone who had made this choice long before she stood up. She turned back to the guests. You laugh at a man rebuilding his life because you were told he lost everything, but you weren't told how it was taken from him, piece by piece, by people who claimed to love him, support him, people who made sure he'd be dismissed before he could defend himself. My throat burned. My eyes stung, not with tears, but with fury, gratitude, shock, all tangled together in a knot I couldn't name. Naomi looked at me, not like I was a cautionary tale, not like I was broken, like I was finally seen. And now, she said, her voice still even, you all know. She stepped back, letting the silence settle like ash over the ballroom. Gavin stood frozen, his face pale, fist clenched, mouth slightly open like he couldn't believe his carefully constructed world was unraveling in front of the very people he'd invited to witness his success. The band didn't start up again. No one moved to speak. And for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel like the man in the background. I felt like the reckoning they never saw coming. You could have heard a silk napkin fall. Naomi stood there, mic still in hand, the hush after her final words stretching into something deeper, like time itself hesitated, unsure what to do next. I wasn't breathing. No one was. Eyes flicked between her and Gavin like a tennis match no one expected. She looked like she was carved out of granite, still, poised, terrifyingly calm. Gavin, on the other hand, had turned the color of unripe cement. The proud, smirking groom was gone. What stood there now was a man losing the floor beneath him in slow motion. She didn't return the mic to him. That part said more than anything. He made a move toward her again. Naomi, what the hell are you doing? She sidestepped his hand like she'd practiced the motion 100 times. I'm finishing. Her voice had cooled. No fire, no tremble. The room belonged to her. Gavin blinked, his mouth opening like he was going to argue, explain, charm. But she wasn't giving him the chance. She turned back to the audience, to the neatly dressed guests who suddenly looked like they regretted front-row seats to a real-life scandal. I didn't come to this decision lightly, she said. Over the last 3 months, I've been collecting evidence. Emails, financial records, voice memos. She pulled out her phone then and tapped it once. A screen behind the head table came to life. Gavin had insisted on a slideshow. Baby photos, college football shots, the two of them grinning at tastings and tropical beaches. Only now it flickered to something else entirely. Screenshots of emails. One from Gavin to Parker. Make sure the board sees the revised doc before Julian does. Another with subject lines like, rebranding plan once he's out, and push vote forward, he's distracted by Piper fallout. Guests gasped. Not the polite kind. The genuine, oh God, we're seeing too much kind. Naomi clicked again, and a recording began to play. Gavin's voice, unmistakable. I don't care how we do it. He built the tech, sure, but it's our names that'll keep it afloat. Royce is too soft. He won't fight back. He still thinks business is about trust. I felt like I'd been hit with electricity. The sound of his voice from months ago, maybe years, broadcast like a confession. The man who used to hug me on holidays, who posed for photos with one arm slung casually around my shoulders, had been plotting my burial while sipping cocktails from my minibar. The silence afterward was a vacuum. Naomi let it hang there. Today, she said, looking directly at Gavin, I handed over all of this to the Attorney General's office. You could feel the oxygen vanish from the room. Someone in the back knocked over a wine glass. Another person muttered something that sounded like, oh, my God. I could see Monroe now, wide-eyed, pulling out his phone. My mother, silent, stunned, statuesque, was staring at Naomi like the entire room had shifted gravity. Gavin stepped forward, hands slightly raised like he thought he could charm his way out of it. Naomi, this is insane. You don't know what you're talking about. I know exactly what I'm talking about, she cut in, her voice no longer soft. And I know about the prenup. That stopped him cold. You could practically hear the gears grinding in his head. The prenup protects me. Naomi finally smiled. It was the kind of smile I'd seen on courtroom dramas right before the cross-examination destroyed someone's alibi. No, Gavin. It protects me. You wrote it to keep your firm separate from mine. Remember? You thought it meant I wouldn't be able to touch what you built. He blinked. She went on. But the language gives majority control to me in the event of fraud, unethical conduct, or criminal exposure. You thought it was a vanity clause. Turns out, it's now the rope. The room stirred, guests whispering behind hands and half-empty glasses. Gavin looked at the screen like it had betrayed him personally. like the evidence had crawled out from under his control just to spite him. "I own controlling interest in your company now," Naomi said, calm and deliberate. "As of this morning." The papers were signed an hour before the ceremony. Gavin looked stunned, pale, small. He turned to his best man, Parker, whose face had already drained of blood. Naomi's eyes landed on me next. "And now I want to speak to someone who understands what it's like to be silenced." I didn't move at first. I thought maybe she was making a broader point, speaking in metaphor. But she stepped down from the dais and walked toward me. The room parted like the Red Sea. When she reached my table, she looked me in the eye. Not with pity, not with performance. "Mr. Royce," she said, "may I have a word?" It wasn't a question. It was a reset button being offered. An invitation. Not just to speak, but to finally be heard. I stood. The chair scraped behind me. I hadn't planned for this. I hadn't even wanted to come. But here I was, rising like a man being called back into his own life. She didn't turn it into a spectacle. She just led me toward the side of the ballroom, away from the spotlight that had burned so many moments into ash. Her hand brushed my elbow, not lingering, just grounding. We stopped near the grand piano, just out of earshot. "I don't know what you think of me right now," she said quietly, "but I didn't marry him out of love. I married him because it was the cleanest way to end him." I stared at her. "You planned this." She nodded. 3 months ago, when I found the first email. I started building the case, but I needed access. So I played my part. It hit me like a wave. All the bridal showers, the rehearsals, the smiles. None of it real. Or maybe all of it more real than anything Gavin had ever constructed. "I did it for myself," she continued. "And for you." I swallowed. "Why me?" "Because they tried to erase you," she said. "And I don't believe in letting men like that win." I looked back toward the crowd. People still murmured. Gavin had vanished. Either fled or been pulled into some quiet corner where his lawyer friend was probably whispering damage control strategies. The stage was cracked now. The illusion broken. Naomi touched my arm once more. "They won't laugh at you again." I met her eyes. "You just changed everything." "No," she said, with the faintest trace of a smirk. "I just flipped the switch. You already had the power." And with that, she walked away. Head high, fire in her stride, leaving behind the wreckage of a truth bomb that would echo far beyond that ballroom. I didn't know what would happen next, but for the first time in a long, long time, I wasn't afraid to find out. I didn't sleep that night. Not a second. After Naomi's mic drop, the ballroom had descended into a chaos I didn't try to contain. Some guests left early, whispering on their way out. Others lingered like they were addicted to scandal, waiting to see if Gavin would claw back some of his dignity. Spoiler alert, he didn't. Last I saw, he stormed out with Parker trailing behind, the two of them already arguing. I didn't follow. I wasn't there for his ending. I was there for mine. Or maybe, for my beginning. Naomi had disappeared not long after we spoke by the piano, leaving behind a ballroom buzzing with questions and 1,000 shifting loyalties. I stayed until the staff started stacking chairs, until the last of the ice in my glass melted into warm water, until I was the only one left standing in a room built for celebration and turned into a courtroom. By morning, the news had already leaked. Monroe called me at 7 a.m., voice breathless. "It's everywhere. Naomi. The slideshow. The prenup. The mic drop. You're trending. Not just in Boston. National outlets picked it up. The Boston Globe is running a full timeline. Your patents, the board meeting, the audio from Gavin." I sat in the corner of Gavin's garage. No, not Gavin's. Not anymore. And listened as Monroe read headlines to me like they were verses from a holy book. He paused. "You okay?" I stared at the oil stains under my cot. "No," I said honestly. "But I'm getting there." Later that morning, Naomi texted me. One line, "Meet me at 14 Tremont. 10 a.m., 3rd floor." No explanation. No signature. I almost didn't go. My pride was bruised, my mind was a mess, and I didn't know what I'd find waiting for me. But I went anyway. 14 Tremont was a modest building tucked between a boutique hotel and a flower shop. Nothing flashy. No security desk. Just stairs and old carpet. I climbed to the 3rd floor and found Naomi already there, standing in front of a glass door that read, Monarch Development Group. "I registered it last week," she said as I approached. "New name. Clean slate. You're not just part of this, Julian. You're the foundation." Inside was a space in transition, boxes, empty desks, wires coiled like sleeping snakes, but the windows overlooked the harbor, and the light pouring in was sharp, clear. Nothing hidden. She led me to a back room. On the table were folders. Dozens. Some thick with printed emails, others with flash drives clipped to the covers. The top folder was labeled simply, Evidence. I didn't lie, Naomi said, sliding it toward me. Everything I said last night. There's more. A lot more. I opened the first folder. Inside were screenshots of emails between Gavin and Parker, timestamps matching key moments in the months before my ousting, discussions of dissolving my stake, mentions of fabricating breach of contract narratives. One email included an attachment of a behavioral risk report my father had apparently commissioned, a psychological profile used to argue that I was too volatile for leadership. I blinked hard. What is this? Naomi looked at me, face calm but her jaw tight. Your father provided the legal team with that report as justification for removing you as CEO. Said you were emotionally unfit. Cited your breakup with Piper and your sleepless schedule as signs of instability. I wanted to laugh, or scream, or cry, maybe all three. I'd stayed up for days on end back then, chasing perfection, pushing prototypes, trying to keep the company afloat through acquisitions. They'd called it passion to my face. Now I saw they'd turned it into pathology behind my back. Naomi handed me another folder. This one details how your patents were transferred without proper documentation. Parker had 2 paralegals refile the IP under a different holding company, one Gavin owned through a shell corp in Delaware. It kept coming. Every page was a revelation and a scar. I wasn't just wronged. I was targeted, removed systematically, silenced deliberately. Every part of me that had once trusted in collaboration, in family, in fairness, it was all laid bare on this table. Why did you do all this? I asked, my voice hoarse. Naomi didn't hesitate. Because I hate injustice. Because I hate liars. And because I saw something in you the moment you spoke, something no one else was brave enough to say out loud. You were robbed. And no one cared. That burned something in me. I sat down, my hands still trembling. You gave up everything. Your wedding. Your reputation. Your safety. For this. No, she said, stepping closer. I gave up illusions. I burned bridges that led to nowhere. And I gained something better. I looked up. What? A partner. The words settled in the space between us. Heavy. Charged. She knelt beside me, pulling out a thumb drive. This one's the most important. It's a voice memo Gavin didn't know I had. He was drunk, talking to Parker about how they let the genius build it, then boxed him out. I recorded it. I've already sent a copy to the AG's office, but this one's yours. She handed it to me like a gift. Like a weapon. Why give me this now? Because the rebuild starts today, she said. And I want to do it with you. Not because I feel sorry for you, but because you're the only person I've met in a long time who knows what it means to lose everything and still want to build something real. I swallowed hard. My entire body felt like it was vibrating. With rage. With relief. With something like clarity. I stared out the window. Boats moved slowly across the harbor. Somewhere down there, someone was beginning their morning with no idea what this day held. I turned back to her. You've read my patents? Every one, she said. Twice. And you believe in them? I believe in you. That did it. The dam cracked. Not tears, but something deeper. An exhale I hadn't known I was holding since the day I walked out of my old office with a cardboard box and a bleeding heart. I stood, reached for the folder again. Then let's build something better. Naomi smiled, and for the first time, it wasn't just fierce. It was hopeful. We shook hands. Not as survivors. Not even as equals. As architects. And for the first time in a very long time, I felt like a man shaping the world again. One truth, one blueprint, one piece of evidence at a time. 6 months later, I stood behind the glass wall of my new office, watching the Boston Harbor shimmer in the late afternoon sun. The same skyline that once mocked me when I was down now stood like a quiet witness to my resurrection. Boats drifted in the distance, the city pulsing with life, unaware. Or maybe uncaring. That the man it once wrote off as a failure was scripting his own second act from a room with a better view than the one he lost. The headlines had long since made their rounds. Wedding bombshell exposes tech scandal. Prenup turns power play. Roy's patents reinstated after fraud allegations confirmed. They loved the drama. They devoured the downfall. But more than that, they adored a comeback story. And I was writing mine. Naomi had stepped into the CEO role of Gavin's former firm like she was born to lead it. She cleaned house, Parker gone, the board restructured, the toxic culture dismantled with swift precision. The name was changed to Monarch Labs, and with my tech finally restored to its rightful owner, we moved fast. We partnered. Not in name only, but in vision. She handled the business, the investors, the branding. I focused on the product, the engineering, the purpose. Together, we were dangerous. The first few weeks were chaos. Endless meetings, legal briefings, interviews. Everyone wanted a piece of the story, but we gave them what mattered: progress. The stolen patents, once locked away and buried under forged signatures and red tape, were officially returned. Our new prototype, the ARC Cell, an advanced renewable microgrid, was in its final development phase. The same blueprint I'd once pitched to a room full of sharks now had the full weight of a clean company behind it. No more sabotage. No more lies. Only momentum. Naomi stepped into my office without knocking. She never did. Her tablet in hand, blazer sharp, expression focused. They approved it, she said. I turned. Who? Department of Energy. Grant for expansion. They're greenlighting a pilot program in 3 urban districts. My chest tightened. Not with fear. With something better, recognition. 3. I said, almost in disbelief. I thought they'd give us one. She grinned. Turns out, they believe in second chances too. I leaned back against the desk, letting that sink in. And the investors? Fully on board. Funding round closes next week. You'll have the resources to scale the team, hire the engineers you want, build the lab from scratch. I exhaled slowly. It's happening. Naomi stepped closer, setting the tablet down. It is. And fast. I need you to meet with the city's Clean Energy Committee next week. I laughed softly. You're really putting me in front of people again? You're the face of this, Julian. Whether you want to be or not. That part still felt surreal. For months, I'd lived in the shadows, on the fringe of the very world I helped shape. Now, I was being pulled back into the spotlight, not because of gossip or pity, but because I had something to say, something that mattered. I watched Naomi as she adjusted the cuffs of her sleeve. She was as much a force as the wind off the harbor. Steady, sharp, forward-moving. In the early days, I'd wondered if our alliance was just circumstantial, if the bond we'd formed in the wreckage of Gavin's wedding would fade once the adrenaline wore off. It didn't. If anything, it deepened. We weren't just rebuilding a business. We were remaking a purpose. And in the spaces between late-night brainstorms and early morning strategy sessions, something more human began to thread its way in. Trust. You ever think about what would have happened if we hadn't met at that coffee shop? I asked her. Naomi looked up, amused. Sometimes. And I probably would have married a man I didn't respect. You'd still be in a garage writing patents on scrap paper. I nodded. Probably. She walked to the window beside me. The city stretched out in front of us, glass and steel and possibility. But we did meet, she said. And now we're here. Her words landed heavy in the best way. I had a team again. A real one. Engineers, coders, interns with fresh ideas and fire in their eyes. We worked late, laughed over takeout, argued over circuitry. I felt alive again. Not just surviving, but leading, creating, belonging. And the garage? It was empty now. The cot folded, the heater unplugged. I'd stopped by once, just to see it, just to remind myself how far I'd come. The oil stains were still there, but they didn't feel like scars anymore. They felt like origin marks. Proof that a man could fall and still build again. Gavin, last I heard, was out on bail. His assets frozen, his name tainted beyond repair. He tried to call me twice. I never picked up. There was nothing left to say. Some bridges weren't meant to be rebuilt. Some wounds were meant to remind you who not to trust. My mother had reached out once, through Monroe. A stiff letter. No apology. Just a suggestion to be mindful of the family name moving forward. I didn't respond. Let the silence be my inheritance. But my focus wasn't on the past anymore. Every morning, I walked into an office filled with light, faces who believed in the work, and a partner who had risked everything to bring truth to the surface. Naomi and I didn't label what we had. It didn't need a title. It had integrity. And that was enough for now. You ready for this next phase? She asked. I turned from the window, picking up the blueprint spread across the drafting table. Born ready. We stood in silence, side by side, the hum of new beginnings vibrating under our feet. And as the sun dipped lower, casting gold across our shared space, I finally understood what it meant to rise. Not just to rebuild what was lost, but to build something no one could take from me again. 6 months into the rebuild, the world called me a lot of things: founder, innovator, survivor. But none of those labels meant as much as the one I quietly clung to: man in control of his own story. That title didn't come with fanfare or press headlines. It came at 2:14 a.m., when I was alone in the office, refining schematics, the city lights blinking like Morse code beyond the glass. It came with every decision made without fear of sabotage, every pitch that ended with a handshake and not a knife in the back. That morning, I sat in our conference room, sunlight flooding the space like a silent vote of confidence. Naomi was on a call with a materials supplier in Seoul. Monroe, now head of our PR and comms, sat across from me with a printout of our upcoming keynote agenda. "You know," he said, "they're calling you the Phoenix of Boston." I snorted. "Is that supposed to be flattering or make me feel like I burst into flames?" He grinned. "Both." Monroe had always been more than a friend. He was the one person who saw me unravel and didn't look away. He never tried to save me, just waited for me to remember I could stand. I looked over the agenda. A joint demo with the city council. Talks with MIT. Our ARC cell units would begin testing in 3 pilot locations within weeks. It was happening. Tangible. Real. Then my phone buzzed. No name. Just a blocked number. Normally, I let those ring out. But something told me to answer. A twitch in the gut. That old instinct I hadn't trusted in years. I stepped into my office and pressed the green icon. Silence. A breath. Then Julian. "It's me." His voice. Thinner. Hollow. Like it had been stretched through guilt and echo chambers. "Gavin." For a moment, the air thickened. My fingers tightened around the phone, the rest of my body frozen in quiet disbelief. "I know I'm the last person you want to hear from," he continued. But I didn't know who else to call. I didn't answer. Let him fill the silence. "They're moving forward with the charges." Parker flipped. Of course he did. Said I was the mastermind. He let out a bitter laugh. "Ironic, huh? After everything, I'm the one with my back to the wall." My mouth was dry. "You're not calling to ask for help, are you?" A pause. "No, I know better than that now." I sat down. "Then what do you want?" Gavin's voice cracked. I just needed to say it. Out loud. That I was wrong. I waited. "I ruined something brilliant," he said. "You created something that mattered, and I didn't just take it. I mocked it. I mocked you. Because I didn't know how to match what you had, so I thought I had to destroy it instead." His confession didn't land with the impact he might have imagined. It wasn't fireworks or catharsis. It was strange, like hearing an echo from a room I'd already boarded up. "I don't expect forgiveness," he added. "I don't deserve it. But I thought maybe you should hear it from me, before the lawyers and the headlines do." I let the silence linger. Then, what changed? Another pause. "Naomi." What she did? That night, she didn't just expose me. She showed me what courage looked like. And I realized I've never had it. I leaned back, watching the boats drift on the harbor beyond my window. "You didn't just steal my company, Gavin. You weaponized our family. You turned our parents against me. You convinced Piper to doubt me. You made me question my own worth." "I know," he whispered. "Then you also know there's no going back. Not to what we were. Not even to something civil." He let out a long exhale. "I figured. But," I said, my voice steady now, "I hope you fix yourself. I hope you sit with the truth long enough to finally understand what you destroyed. Because I'm not holding it for you anymore." A beat of silence. "Goodbye, Gavin." I hung up. There was no satisfaction. No power trip. Just release. Like dropping a weight I'd carried for years without realizing how much it had bent me. Naomi found me in the office 10 minutes later. She paused at the door, reading my face. "Everything okay?" I nodded slowly. Gavin called. Her brows lifted. What did he want? To confess. To clear his conscience, maybe. I don't know. "And how do you feel?" I thought about it. Really thought about it. "Free," I said. She smiled, stepping in. Then it was worth picking up. We didn't talk more about it. There was no need. Some chapters close without ceremony. Quietly. With the understanding that some apologies come too late for repair, but not too late for closure. That afternoon, Monroe finalized our press release for the upcoming Investor Summit. Naomi and I reviewed our presentation for the Department of Energy. The ARC cell, once the victim of backroom betrayal, now sat gleaming on its pedestal in the lab, ready to power communities, schools, even city blocks. We were no longer scrambling for footing. We were building something solid, scalable, honest. That night, I stood on the balcony of my apartment, my new place, my name on the lease, a view that belonged to me. I looked out over the city that had once turned its back. Now it watched quietly, as if waiting to see what I'd do next. My phone buzzed again. This time, it was Monroe. They want you on the cover. I raised an eyebrow. Who? TechVision Weekly. The same outlet that buried you 2 years ago. I laughed. Now they want to celebrate the ashes they helped scatter? He chuckled. It's poetic. I turned back to the city lights. Tell them yes. But I'm not posing next to the lab coat and prototype like some comeback cliche. I want to be photographed in the garage. There was silence. Then Monroe said, You're serious? Dead serious. Because the world needed to see where greatness really begins. Not in glass towers. Not in corner offices. But in the places they left us to rot. Where we survived. Where we remembered who we were. And where we decided who we'd become. The Phoenix of Boston? Let them call me that if they want. I was never just fire. I was the match. Investor Day. The kind of event that used to make my palms sweat and my confidence flicker, even back when I was on the rise. But this time, there was no nervousness. No clinging to a prototype like it was a shield. I walked into Monarch Lab's new innovation hub with my shoulders back and my head clear, wearing a charcoal gray suit tailored to fit a man who'd finally grown into his own skin. The building itself was symbolic. Glass, steel, open spaces. No closed-door meetings. No secrets. Naomi stood beside me at the entrance, tablet in hand, earpiece in place, already 5 steps ahead. She looked like a woman born for war and policy alike, calm, sharp, exact. Everything's confirmed, she said without even looking up. 35 investors. 21 media outlets. DOE reps are here. Monroe is wrangling the last-minute press requests. I nodded, adjusting the knot of my tie. Let's give them something to remember. We moved through the lobby like a current. My team, half of them in Monarch blue polos, the other half in lab coats, buzzed around us with focused energy. It was no longer just my vision. It was ours. A living organism of minds that believed in the impossible and made it tangible. Inside the main presentation hall, the ARC cell prototype sat at the center of a raised platform, sleek, humming quietly, its chrome and composite shell gleaming beneath soft light. It was no bigger than a large suitcase, but it had the power to change entire neighborhoods. Renewable, scalable, safe. A design I'd scribbled on a whiteboard 4 years ago in a rented co-working space when I still believed the right ideas could save the world. Now, it was real. The chairs filled quickly. High-backed leather seats arranged in concentric half-circles around the stage. The faces were familiar. People who had once declined my calls now sat eagerly, pens poised, eyes sharp. Others were new, young venture capitalists with clean slates and deeper pockets. But all of them had one thing in common. They wanted in. Naomi opened the presentation. Her voice was crisp, confident, impossible to ignore. Welcome to the future of energy independence, she began. You're not just here to witness a pitch. You're here to witness the correction of a wrong. To align with a company built on truth, innovation, and resilience. We're not offering a product. We're inviting you to be part of a movement. She handed it over to me with a nod. Cameras flashed. Lights adjusted. And I stepped up. I looked out at the sea of polished faces, the subtle nods, the occasional glances toward their tablets. I remembered the garage. I remembered the laughter. The humiliation. The moment my mother stood and called me a disgrace. The night Naomi turned the wedding into a courtroom and gave me back my voice. I took a breath. Ladies and gentlemen, I began. Thank you for being here. 16 months ago, I was standing in a garage under a flickering light bulb, sleeping beside a broken lawnmower and a stack of boxes labeled Gavin's crap. I had no company, no patents, no job. What I had was an idea, and the belief that truth eventually breaks through. I let that settle. Today, I'm not just a man with a prototype. I'm part of a team that uncovered corruption, reclaimed stolen intellectual property, and rebuilt not from revenge, but from vision. The ARC cell you see behind me isn't just an energy solution. It's a symbol of what happens when people refuse to stay buried. A few murmurs. A few more glances up. Our microgrid system has been approved for 3 pilot zones in the city. Each ARC cell can power 40 residential units for up to 6 days off-grid. Scalable architecture allows rural and urban implementation. And yes, we're patent protected. Fully restored. Legally bulletproof. Naomi smiled from the wings. I caught her eye, and for a moment, I remembered the coffee shop. Her voice low, saying, "He doesn't know I'm here." And now she stood beside me, not hiding, not apologizing, just present, unflinching. The media called me the Phoenix of Boston, I said, smiling slightly. They love their metaphors. But I wasn't reborn from fire. I was reforged in silence, in exile, in the space where you learn who you really are when no one's watching. I stepped aside, waving toward the prototype. This is your moment to watch. The ARC cell powered up. A monitor above displayed real-time data, energy conversion rates, thermal balances, feedback loops. The numbers climbed like a symphony. Smooth, predictable, perfect. The screen flashed green, stabilized. Applause erupted. Not a polite ripple. A wave. Hands clapped. Camera shutters clicked. Phones filmed like they were documenting history. And in a way, they were. Because this wasn't just redemption. It was revolution. After the presentation, Monroe ushered me through a whirlwind of interviews. One by one, reporters tried to bait me into throwing Gavin's name around. I didn't take the bait. This story isn't about revenge, I said again and again. It's about resilience. One of the reporters, a younger guy from an online tech platform, asked, "Do you think success is the best form of justice?" I paused, then answered honestly, "No. Truth is." He nodded, impressed. By late afternoon, Naomi and I stood in the corridor outside the lab. The building had quieted, the echo of celebration still lingering in the walls. "You did it," she said softly. "No," I said. "We did." She leaned against the wall, folding her arms. "You're not just back, Julian. You're 10 steps ahead." I looked at her, really looked at her. "So are you." She laughed, shaking her head. "To think, I almost married your brother. That would have been tragic for both of you." We stood in silence for a beat, the kind that feels full and earned. Then she asked, "What now?" I looked down the hall. The lab, the team, the whiteboards filled with equations. Now we make sure they never forget what it looks like when you rise with your integrity intact. The Phoenix? Maybe. But this wasn't about myth. It was about memory. I was not the man in the garage anymore. They didn't bury me. They planted me. And I bloomed in full view.